Hello, everyone, and welcome to Emerge Workplace. I'm Matt Ball, Vice President and Market Lead at the Financial Health Network. And on behalf of the entire team, thank you for joining us. Over the next 2 days, we'll be diving deep to gain a better understanding of what works to improve employee financial health and how the future of work is shaping workplace financial health. We've got a great lineup of sessions over the next 2 days. If you haven't already, I encourage you to register on the Emerge site to receive email updates on sessions and speakers, as well as links to the content and announcements. Workplace financial wellness programs are ascendant. More and more employers are seeking ways to address the challenges that their workforce faces in today's complex financial times. It's rare, however, that we get questions from employers of any size and across any industry of, why does this matter and why should I care about it? Instead, the number one question we hear from employers of all sizes and across all industries is, what works to improve the financial health of my workers? Today's sessions are going to tackle this question in particular. But before we begin, I'd like to send a special message of thank you to all of our sponsors. Their support of these critical conversations at this moment, and this moment in time, has been truly inspiring. I want to spend a special thank you to our foundation sponsors, JP Morgan Chase and Prudential Financial, our gold sponsors, BlackRock and PayPal, our silver sponsor, the MetLife Foundation, and our bronze sponsor, Morgan Stanley at Work. We sincerely appreciate your support. By now, I expect you've all participated in enough digital and virtual conferences that these run rules may be a bit redundant, but please indulge us for a moment as we just share some ground rules. We've launched a Q&A and polling tool on the right of the Emerge Workplace page, where we encourage you to share your thoughts and ask questions throughout the day. Our sessions are short and action-packed, so we'll do our best to address as many of your submitted questions during the interactive roundtable at the end of today's sessions. We'll also be activating a few polls as a way to engage our audience and help guide our conversation. If you scroll to the bottom of this page, you'll find content related to the topics we'll be covering during today's sessions. If you have any technical questions or issues throughout the next few days, please click on the chat bubble or on the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning is available. Please see the link below the streaming window to access this feature. And finally, please let us know what you think. Your feedback matters to us. You can email us at emerge@finhealthnetwork.org, and a link will be inserted into the chat box if you didn't catch that email address. All right, let's kick things off. We're excited for our first panel, a fireside chat with Grace Zunsick, the Chief People and Culture Officer at Chobani. Grace is going to highlight the journey and approach that Chobani has taken as they're making worker financial security a priority, not just for the organization, but at the senior levels of that enterprise. This chat's going to be led by Franz Pasha, and it's important to context why Franz and the team at PayPal are important for this conversation. Franz is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at PayPal. Not only is PayPal a leader in the digital payment space, PayPal's been on a journey itself in prioritizing and helping to improve the financial lives of its workforce. Over the last several years, PayPal has been on its own internal journey to bolster the financial health of its employees. Following a survey of hourly and entry-level employees, PayPal learned that despite being paid at or above market rates, many of their employees were facing the same financial struggles that the company itself was trying to address for its customers. In response, PayPal took immediate action and rolled out a comprehensive set of initiatives through which the company lowered the cost of employee health insurance premiums by almost 60% for whom the cost of care was too high, made every worker at PayPal a shareholder, raised wages around the globe where appropriate, and developed a new compensation metric, net disposable income, to gauge its progress. And it launched a full suite of financial education and planning programs to help employees continue to improve their financial lives. For the employees who benefited from these programs, PayPal has seen a reduction in the number of employees who report running out of funds in between pay periods, an increase in healthcare benefit enrollment and employees upgrading their plans, and a higher rate of participation in some of their long-term and short-term saving features. It's important for that context because these are the types of actions that both PayPal and Chobani are taking in order to help improve the financial lives of their workforce. As more and more companies are engaging in this important conversation, I'm pleased to introduce Franz and Grace, who will be leading us during our first session. Thank you.
And I want to start off by giving a special thanks to Jennifer Tescher and the entire Financial Health Network team. The work you're doing is so important, so timely, innovative, and groundbreaking. And but for us, most of all, you're just great partners, and we're really proud to be doing this work together with you. So I want to get right to my conversation, and I'm really excited to hear from Grace about her story. But let me just say it's entirely appropriate that we're beginning this conference by focusing in on the financial health of our employees. It's such an important place to start for every company to be thinking about employee financial wellness and to be thinking about financial health in the context of what we can be doing for our employees. And we've been on this journey with the Financial Health Network and others focusing on this. And we look at it as our most important priority, how we think about investing in our employees, putting our employees first, and employee financial wellness is critical. Chobani has been just a pioneer in this work. And I'm really proud to be sharing the screen with Grace Zunsick. She leads the People and Culture team as the Chief People and Culture Officer at Chobani, and she's been there really from the beginning of the journey. And Chobani has led on so many fronts: employee incentives, hourly compensation initiatives, pay equity, volunteer programs, leadership programs for women, diversity and inclusion programs, and during the pandemic, a range of ways of supporting employees that have really been cutting edge. But the story I want to sort of discuss today is Chobani's early focus on employee financial wellness and financial security, how that came about, the kinds of decisions that you made, and also to share with us some of the milestones of that journey as to what you're seeing as the outcomes. I think it'll be so important for so many of us who are in this work, but coming into it at a later stage. So Grace, if you could just share that'd be great.
Sure. Well, Franz, thanks so much for having me today. And thanks to all of my colleagues in the HR world who I know are on the phone today, and appreciate you taking the time to hear our stories. Well, the journey for me began 9 years ago, as Franz had mentioned. I'm from the small town in upstate New York, where the first Chobani location is based, very close to. And I remember Franz showing up to my first day of work in a suit. To the plant, and I think I even might have had the heels on, coming out of a traditional bank, and I had my MBA, and I showed up to work, and I remember Hamdi introducing me to his founding team, and thinking, oh, it'll be Silicon Valley type founding team, a lot of people that look like me in a suit. And sure enough, the founding team were old-timer craft employees that stuck around to fulfill Hamdi's dream and vision. They were community people. They were people like my mom and dad. And it was wonderful to really start my journey with Chobani with a deep understanding of the people who we were here to support. And those people were the hourly associates that made everything happen between South Evanston and our plant in Twin Falls. Some of the early decisions that I remember with Hamdi, and there've been so many amazing stories along the way, was really the concept of the living wage. And for Hamdi, from a practical business perspective in those early days, he was using a living wage and good wages as a way to attract the immigrant and refugee community from Utica to make the 45-minute drive to come work at our plant in New Berlin, New York. Benefits were important, how we engaged with the community. Our first community support effort in upstate New York was building a baseball field for the local boys and girls in the local community because they didn't have a baseball field. And his mindset was always to start local. And what I think is brilliant about, Hamdi's influence, which has really trickled down into our whole executive leadership team here at the company, is to remember local first and to sort of be a couple years ahead of where the trends are going. And so when you look at the investment in hiring in immigrant and refugee communities, that's become much more on trend today. The work that we've done around leave benefits and pay, and I admire him for that, kind of having that foresight of what's going to be next.
So as there must have been some moments where you and with your background, and you look at this investment being made in employee financial wellness and financial security. How are we going to know if this is working? how are we going to see what this contributes back into the business and the growth of the business and the success of the business? How are you thinking about that? And were there milestones where you could sort of step back and say, okay, we are seeing changes in retention, or, things are changing around here because of the way in which we're investing in employees?
Mm-hmm. Well, we were motivated by the good of it all, right? So we were motivated by taking care of the people that really started the business, that got the business off the ground in upstate New York. But what we found is by taking care of people, we would look at the turnover numbers and see single-digit turnover in the plant in upstate New York. When we were designing our parental leave benefit, I remember it was at a time when companies were really debating between who was the primary and who was the secondary parent. And I remember sitting across the table from Hamdi saying, well, a parent is a parent. There's no primary and secondary. I don't view myself as a secondary parent as a father. And so thinking about parental leave for everyone, and for foster and for adoption and same-sex couples, and being generous with the benefit that would apply to everybody from the cupper in the plant in South Evanston, New York, to members of the leadership team in Hamdi. I think that's helped with retention amazingly so. And what's been interesting about it is Chobani's innovation, yes, product innovation, brand innovation, but a lot of the innovative ideas within the company are coming from ways in which we can support our people. And I think that's what's been really rewarding and interesting. And the benefit of that now for, other folks on the line are thinking about this is that it actually matters now from a branding perspective, an employer brand perspective. And even in the choices that consumers are making in terms of the products that they stand behind or that they support or pay the extra dollar to put in their grocery cart in our circumstances in terms of what we've done. But I think last year, especially during the pandemic, we were able to rally around our people so quickly because of these foundational things that we did in the early days. It's also given us permission to just explore. So for example, we thought, well, we need to commit to at least a $15 minimum wage at the company. This makes sense. How far away are we from that today? Let's just have that discussion. And realizing we weren't so far away, let's go ahead and make that commitment. So the business orientation is to explore, be innovative, think of new ideas and concepts. And it served us well during the pandemic because we were prepared to do right by our people, who we absolutely needed to do right by us to keep up with the demand in the marketplace that we had when so many people were staying at home and buying more groceries and thankfully, buying more of our products. So
you're too modest to disclose it in this setting, but Chobani was named the most innovative company by Fast Company last year, which is something for all of us on the phone to aim for, and not what one would necessarily expect from a company in food production and food service. Mm-hmm. That's really, it speaks to the kinds of innovation you've been bringing to how you treat employees and how you work with employees. Maybe I'd love to sort of talk a little more about your experience with your employee community during the pandemic, because my hypothesis is that, and we felt this at PayPal as well, is that having really invested in employees' financial security and financial wellness and that sense of belonging that comes with it, that your community came into the pandemic in a more resilient way than perhaps had you not. And I was curious if you could share some of that experience of both how you thought about the ways in which you built on that platform of your employee community as you came into the pandemic, and what did you see were the differences in your experience from maybe what other companies experienced?
Yeah. The biggest concern for our employees was, I need to be paid. And what if I'm not well?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And I think a lot of that was the first primary question to answer is, you're not well? That's okay. Stay home and you will be paid. So the special sick pay implementation that we had as an organization out of the gate was really important. We wanted to show recognition and support. So we did things like, free take-home pizzas. We had trucks of toilet paper delivered to the plants because employees were telling us that toilet paper was a real issue for them. All the table stakes were there around mask usage and temperature checks and the daily health screen and that feeling of safety when you walked into the building. But it was really the support around around the community that we showed. We increased our quarterly bonus program just to demonstrate that commitment that we had to our people to say, look, we're going to give you a little extra each quarter because we bet that you need a little extra each quarter with everything going on at home. We had a $100 a day childcare subsidy that was very effective for our working moms. And it was just beautiful. I mean, all of these things coming together to make people feel that they were truly the priority throughout the duration of last year. I think it put a lot of strain on our managers and leaders who were working, running shifts and what we're going to do for them going forward in terms of recognition and training and development, because they were just extraordinary leading these teams during the pandemic. And I think there's been a lot of talk about frontline employees and all the sacrifices made and the hard work. Working 12-hour shift on your feet isn't so easy, and being out there and doing that day in and day out. But I also want to recognize the managers and the leads that kept those teams together and kept the product going out the door to get to consumers across the country. Service, too, was a rallying for the community. We were doing trucks a day to food banks across the country. And I think people saw that happening and felt connected to that purpose and mission. But I'll tell you, when we told our corporate teams, we call them support teams, corporate with a small c, across the business what we were doing for our hourly associates throughout the pandemic, it really inspired them and motivated them too, right? So I think something that companies should be thinking about, the things that you do for your frontline rally the whole business behind common cause and purpose. And we saw that in a beautiful way in 2020.
Yeah, and that has huge benefits for your customers. And this really goes to the question lots of us are talking about, and you and I have talked about this, about thinking about multi-stakeholder capitalism and how putting employees really first and foremost as you think about how you create value and how you make a difference for all of your stakeholders, and by investing in your employees and really positioning them for resilience and for being able to weather storms like this and to stay part of a vibrant employee community and not worrying about, are they going to be able to make ends meet, or how are they going to support their families in tough situations, does inspire the whole company. And it does enable you to do more for your customers, and in your case, certainly more for the communities in which your employees live. So it's really this is really a great validation of the model, I think. So I know that we don't have too much more time left, but maybe I just ask, sort of, as you're looking forward and sort of these next dimensions of working with your employee body, having come through this year, are there some things you're particularly excited about or inspired about in terms of those next initiatives that you'd like to share? Or
No, for sure. I think a deeper understanding around so many different elements of this, right? So what I think is beautiful about the Financial Health Network is the surveying tool, really getting into the weeds of the analytics and understanding, and I applaud everything the network has done in that area. We've been looking at childcare as a major strategic pillar. We've been looking at low-cost loans, which is something that we've recently provided socially responsible credit. It's what we call it to our employees. That's been very helpful in many situations, the 401k, et cetera. The evolution of our growth sharing plans, which are very publicly known, out there in the world, and what's going to happen there. But I'm excited about the next big idea. I mean, I would encourage everyone who's attending today to really quantify the ideas, because I've been so pleasantly surprised about some of these high-packed ROI initiatives that really haven't been as costly to Chobani as we thought they were going to be, and really taking the time to explore that. But I think that the pandemic and what we've all experienced and the hardship has brought us closer together and more connected, and given us more permission than ever to innovate in putting people first. So I'm excited about all of that and what will result and what will keep coming out of the pandemic, the things that made sense, that really added so much value, and what we should stick with, the child care subsidy being an example of that we're continuing now. And really listening to our people and understanding better what their needs are and where the company can step in and continue to have a good impact.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way for me to go to the close. It's I mean, it's really as I think I said at the outset, a lot of us have been watching Chobani and the progress and your innovations over, I guess, the last decade. And it's really been inspiring to have a chance to sort of hear from you directly and to be able to get some additional perspective of from where you sit in the journey of the company. And I guess just in winding down this first session, it's clear to me that all of every company has an opportunity to really start thinking hard about how its employees are experiencing the ups and downs in the economy, how the workplace and how they connect in the workplace community affects the way in which they live the rest of their lives in their communities. And we really have a big opportunity and an obligation to think about how our employees' financial health is having an impact on them and their families and their communities. So just finally, I'd say that there's a lot of work being done by a number of different companies in partnership with the Financial Health Network and the Good Jobs Institute and Just Capital. And it's a joint initiative around worker financial wellness. And I'm hoping that for all of you who out there who have not yet had a chance to have some exposure to this, definitely look into it. And we'd welcome providing more information around this. And a special thank you to Grace and to all of our friends at the Financial Health Network. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Thank you, Franz.
Grace and Franz for leading us through that really interesting and important conversation. There are a few things that came up in the questions that I think are going to be important themes for us to pay attention to, including how do you go about just assessing and understanding the needs of your workforce? We're going to have a poll question that's going to be coming up in a second, but I also want to make reference to a new initiative that we launched in partnership with PayPal, Just Capital, and the Good Jobs Institute called the Worker Financial Wellness Initiative. This initiative is focused and calls upon America's companies to make worker financial wellness a C-suite priority. And a key action that we're asking companies to take is to actually conduct an assessment of the needs of the financial health of their workers. We're going to include a link in the chat feature here. And we encourage all of you to please pay attention, go look at the link, and explore the initiative as a way to help your own company become a financial health leader, as both Chobani and PayPal have demonstrated that they are. We're going to be transitioning now to our next session with my workplace partner in crime, Beth Brocklin, as well as Ryan Engelhart from Humana. We're going to be talking about some of the issues and realities we're seeing a role of data assessment. Thank you all for completing the poll. As we look at some of the data here, I think it's going to be really interesting to keep tabs on how is your organization going about completing these polls, completing the assessments, and doing all the things that are important. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth and Ryan, who are going to lead us through the next session.
Brocklin, Senior Director here at the Financial Health Network, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Ryan Engelhart, Associate Wellbeing Manager for Humana, to talk about using data to design workplace financial health solutions. Ryan is part of the team that designs and implements financial well-being solutions for Humana's associates. He was also a leader in the effort to develop Humana's Associate Wellbeing Snapshot, which is a really unique and sophisticated tool that provides the company's leaders with a 360-degree view of associates' well-being across several dimensions. Ryan, thank you so much for being here today. Let's talk about the Wellbeing Snapshot. What is it? Why was it built? How did you build it? Who was involved? Love to hear that story from you, starting from the beginning.
Yeah, Beth, I'm happy to be here today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join, and certainly I'm happy to share any insights that we have regarding the snapshot. Specifically, when Humana started on what we sort of term our well-being movement and our well-being journey, that term is quite commonplace now, but Humana identified it about 11 years ago and began to define that term of well-being. As a healthcare company, we had long talked about health, primarily physical health and things of that nature, as a focus for us, both for our associates and members. But as we pivoted to well-being, we defined our 4 pillars as health, security, purpose, and belonging. Specifically, each of those pillars has some sub-pillars. For instance, health has physical, emotional, spiritual, under the health component. Specifically, as we embarked on an effort to really integrate well-being across our enterprise in how we served our members, it was apparent that we had to demonstrate some of that commitment on our own associates as well. What they felt as employees of the company would then be reflected back to our members that they served. And so in 2012, I was leading a team that had ownership of health analytics and data. And as we pivoted, we found ourselves pulling in more and more data sources that we could look at as a company. And it was almost overwhelming. There wasn't a lot of ability at that point in time to sift through the various data sources and be thinking about which ones were actually driving outcomes, which one were important for our associates and leaders to focus on. And so what we did is we stepped back. We sort of dumped all of that data on the table, and then we sifted through it. And across those 4 pillars of well-being, we found about 150 metrics that we felt like gave us sampling. And not necessarily, we didn't know at the time that it was the right exact metrics, but gave us a sampling of key metrics across the spectrum that would allow us to understand sort of whole person and whole company, whole enterprise well-being as best we could. That included things, on the financial realm. We're here talking about financial health today, such as, what percentage people were contributing to their 401k, HSA contributions, earning incentives that were offered as part of the health plan or being an employee. But it also included things like questions from the engagement scores about people being connected to a sense of purpose working for the company. Or frankly, some responses to the health assessment about, the rates of smoking or obesity, how people felt about their diet and their nutrition, things of that nature. And then here's what I think, is the really interesting thing that we did with it that may be a little bit different because I think a lot of people's companies look at that kind of data in an HR capacity. We decided that we were going to, in some ways, unleash this data by organizing it around the various functional organizations within the company and sharing it with leaders that had at least 250 or more associates. And so we organized this and gave every leader that led that large of an organization or larger a snapshot that had their specific individual's data on it. Not anybody at an individual level, granted, it was all aggregate, but it really allowed for them to feel like it wasn't just an enterprise measure. This was something personal, and they were sort of forced to take ownership of that data. And we also allowed them to see where the enterprise was. And so they had a sense of where they stood related to the overall enterprise. And I think that is what really started the snowball of our culture shifting, so that we were, as a group of leaders of HR that was organizing the data and sharing it and consulting around it, accountable for improving those metrics.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that last part about the additional step that you took to share the snapshot with those leaders, because I think that's what's one of the things that's really unique about your approach is the degree of transparency and
right.
Sharing of information across the company that you've taken through this process. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how access to all of this data has informed decision-making about associates' well-being and about the benefits you offer, both at the level of the HR organization, but in light of the fact that, leaders across the organization have access to this data, how has this shaped their decision-making?
Well, I absolutely, I think it has changed some of that way that we have thought about decisions. To be clear, when that data, we leverage the data, we really empower those leaders, as I said before, to sort of take ownership. We were able to identify some areas where there were best practices that we weren't able to before, because we were segmenting it and looking at data and trends by specific areas. And so not even necessarily just offering benefits or external programs, we were able to figure out there were some areas of the company, and 30, 40, 50,000 people, there were some pockets that were doing some really great things on their own that we were able to then translate some of those best practices across the enterprise, and really, share with other leaders, so that we were able to, develop more of sort of almost an innovation mindset around well-being internally at a grassroots level, in addition to some of that external, to your point, sort of sourcing of, going out and getting a vendor to fill a gap in benefits that we might have and that kind of thing. I certainly also think that it did help identify, some of those gaps that we could plug with additional benefits, support, programming, education, etc. And a lot of that came not just through the data and the data saying, well, this looks a little bit low here, or that kind of thing, but those conversations. And so we went out as a team, and when we were delivering these, a lot of these leaders are very operationally minded. They want to dig into the numbers, but they want to talk about, well, what's driving this? How can we improve that? And I think a lot of that dialogue is really where we can help identify some of those. One of the solutions that we implemented last year is an earned wage access solution. And the initial concept for that came through one of these snapshot consultations a couple of years ago, when that kind of concept was still a little bit more in its infancy. And then the pandemic hit, and that was the right opportunity to implement that solution. But I remember having a conversation with a leader, who leads a large organization of individuals who are relatively more moderately paid, based on, sort of being a more call center focused in terms of that employee population. And that was a solution that she had heard about, and had brought to us, and that sort of started the ball rolling of awareness and interest in that solution. So it's not just the data, but it's really what the data enables in terms of the shared ownership in some ways of thinking about solutions that can help associates.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting example of how the data transparency has led to a shift in culture, as you said earlier, and the positive benefits that can flow from that. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about, once the data enables you to identify a specific need, how does Humana think about which solutions might be the right fit for your associates? Maybe the earned wage access is a good example, or maybe there's another example that you could point to.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm happy to speak to that solution, but also others as well. I mean, the reality is that solution is one that we were toying around with the idea for a while before we actually pursued it. We had a couple of conversations with potential vendors, and the laying the foundation, it seems sometimes, is in an HR capacity is one of the hardest things to do. There's questions of justifying, of things. That one was actually very fortuitous, where we already had some of that foundation and knowledge and awareness. And then when the pandemic did hit, and we sort of everybody transitioned to working at home last March, March 20th or so last year, we were having a meeting about, this is going to be bad, in terms of the financial instability. What can we do to really help support our associates through this? And so I think that's something that it was already in some ways ready. I hate to say it. We were already sort of partway down the path of actually developing that solution. And so so I think the reality is that once we get to that point, we obviously have a process of working with our IT partners and helping to vet and select an appropriate vendor. I will say that we have several lenses. When we step back and think about our benefits, we have several lenses that we look at. They include talent strategy, what's going to help us attract and retain the talent we need to execute on the company's priorities and strategy. External competitiveness, we certainly look at what other companies out there are offering, both for ideas, but also to make sure that we're keeping our benefits within reasonable ranges, so that we're not falling behind. Financial considerations, everybody has a budget, and as do we, and that has to be a point of consideration. We also look at associate preference, though. That's something that not necessarily tied to the snapshot specifically, but we actually have used an analytical process called conjoint analysis over the last dozen years or so on several occasions to really ask our associates what they value about benefits. And that conjoint methodology allows you to sort of force trade-offs and get a lot of really deep analytics about what they really value. Because everybody can say, I want more benefits, I want more well-being incentives, I want more 401k, and more vacation days and things of that nature. I think that what really you have to be able to do, though, is to understand it in a hopefully a more nuanced manner and really understand what people's trade-offs are. And so that has allowed us in a very analytical sense to invite our associates into the conversation, ask them what they value, and then use all of that data to help figure out, how we do balance all of those lenses of talent and competitiveness and budget and what associates want to produce something that makes a compelling benefit package overall for our associates.
Yeah, and I think that raises an interesting point, actually. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, too, about the process through which you had this consultation with a leader of a group that had a certain type of need that was evident among the workers and the associates in their department and their group. And I think given all the data that you have at your fingertips in the snapshot, you have the ability to disaggregate, to analyze the data from a lot of different lenses. And I think in light of just what we've seen over the last year, people are experiencing experiencing the financial crisis as a result of COVID in many different ways. I'm curious to what extent you have been able to, or how you think about looking at different segments of your associates, using the data you have and really, isolating specific needs and prioritizing those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, first off, I would say that, we really, when the pandemic did hit, we moved to respond to what even before we had identified, exact needs, we were moving to respond in ways that we felt like we're going and trying to anticipate what some of those needs were going to be, around time off, around some greater flexibility to work in a remote capacity with all of the stresses that come with kids being out of school and things of that nature. But also financial, and so we were looking at, how we can implement solutions that gave people additional support and resilience and flexibility, financially at this time. One of the things that we were able to do with a lot of the data we had from the snapshot is we had progressed from just looking at it by organizations to actually also looking at it through some other lenses. We have network resource groups, which most organizations probably have in some name, but we have been able to look at those groups and understand potentially some of the strengths, and the opportunities, the vulnerabilities of some of those groups, and so throughout the pandemic, as we've been offering any solutions, whether it's our standard benefits and looking at utilization, medically, things of that nature, but also especially for some of the new benefits that we were offering and really, putting out there to help support people over the last year, we were looking at that through some of those lenses that we've become already accustomed to looking at, through a lens of people of different ethnicities, through different pay, sort of tiers or salary tiers. Our moderately paid associates, which we sort of define as those generally, making under about $50,000 a year, is of particular importance to us to make sure that we're protecting them and that we're understanding the impact on them, because it's probably amplified, especially in a financial capacity, when there's shocks to the system, when there's additional demands placed on their finances by unforeseen events, et cetera.
Well, Ryan, I feel like we could continue talking about this for much more time. I really appreciate your time. I think we're out of it for now, and just really thank you for sharing your insights with our audience today.
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share. I really think that, as a main takeaway, I think that just sharing the data and sort of democratizing making it transparent has really, I think, enabled us as a culture to shift and to include everybody in that process of having that culture progress and shift and grow. So we certainly appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
and manifest.
More than half of Americans struggle to meet basic financial obligations, and 4 out of 10 have trouble paying an unexpected $400 bill. In fact, during last year's government shutdown, more than a quarter of federal workers said they took money from their 401k to pay their bills, ultimately jeopardizing their long-term retirement security. To better prepare workers for the unexpected, employers are increasingly offering ways to build an emergency savings cushion at work. These emergency savings options are in addition to your retirement savings contributions. And if you don't need the funds for an unexpected expense, these savings can be added to your regular retirement savings to generate more income in retirement. Life is full of surprises. Tackle them head on by contributing to an emergency savings fund today.
I'm Heidi Johnson, Director of Behavioral Economics at the Financial Health Network, and we're going to be talking about how employers can offer options for automatic savings to their workers during this panel. I'm very excited to be joined by Brian Gilmore, who is a director at Commonwealth, and by Naeem Kabir, a software engineer and applied scientist at Even. So we're going to get into talking about why automatic savings can be helpful for workers, what some of the obstacles are to providing that as an option if you're an employer, and most importantly, what each of these organizations have done to try to address some of those challenges. So as we go through and introduce each of you, I'd like to start just by reflecting on why automatic savings can be helpful, why this is something you've chosen to orient your work towards. And let's start with you, Kabir. Why is Even working on automated savings? What are some of the benefits that employers should be thinking about?
Sure. I think one of the main reasons we're working on it is because we know it's a giant problem. Like, it is a now famous statistic from 2018 that 40% of Americans can't deal with an emergency $400 expense, which is a problem because I feel like life tends to throw $400 curveballs at you all the time. Not only that, but we know psychologically it's hard to save. Behavioral economics has taught us that we feel this loss aversion, like we feel losses far more acutely than we do gains, especially gains that are bound to come to you in the future. So it's not that much of a stretch to imagine on payday, when that money hits your bank account, it will be a very difficult decision to take a piece of it and put it in a savings account. It'll feel like a loss to you. So with automatic savings, where we can deduct that paycheck, we can deduct like a portion of your paycheck before it ever hits your bank account, that friction kind of goes away. You no longer have to make that hard decision each and every paycheck. You just need to make it the one time, and then it kind of frees you. There's that, and there's also the fact that the infrastructure for this already exists. We've been doing paycheck deductions for 401k for a while, and that's like a long-term saving solution. A lot of people aren't there yet. So it made sense to us to have this short-term 401k essentially, and that's what we can deliver.
I love that you brought in the behavioral perspective there, right, of what is psychologically easier for employees to engage in. And I know that's a component of Brian's work as well. With Commonwealth, you're working on auto-enrollment, right, that first stage of getting started with savings. And can you tell us a little bit about, how you're taking that from the retirement space into more short-term savings and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having us, and to FHN for putting on this panel. So I think it's helpful to think about enrollment as separate from the actual savings behavior, because enrollments are really about the process of having an account to save into and a mechanism for saving. And we know that some employees don't already have a suitable emergency savings account set up. If they do, they might not have that account information available with them already when, say, onboarding for a new job, which is often a prime opportunity to starting to save. So the idea of automatic enrollment is about making the process of having a suitable emergency savings account as easy as possible. So as you mentioned, similar to the retirement experience, not everyone is walking around with that retirement account. You don't have to choose that retirement account. The employer is setting that up for you. Why not apply that similar sort of default approach to, as an employer, choosing a high quality savings account for those short-term emergency savings needs that employees can easily use for savings. And in the retirement space, these defaults have been incredibly effective at driving participation rates. A recent study showed that having that default enrollment option for retirement savings increased participation from 44% to 86%. And that's because defaults really take out the friction of that process for an employee to choose the right account, make sure they have all the information they need, choose how much to save. I think it's still absolutely necessary that to ensure that there's choice and that employees are fully informed about the details of that default account, how it works, how they get their money out, if there's any fees or costs associated with it, and that it's really easy to opt out or adjust along the way. But simply providing that kind of default enrollment option at the outset is going to make it much easier for folks to get started.
And yeah, as you said, Brian, a lot of this work is already being done with retirement accounts, right? But it's a lot less common to see these techniques being used for short-term savings. So why is that? Why aren't all employers offering automatic enrollment for short-term savings as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Kabir mentioned the stat about, the 2018 stat of, nearly half the country not having $400 in savings for an emergency. I think, that stat and others, I think, have made folks realize how significant of a problem this is and a challenge. And I think employers are just now seeing their role in this process. So just the idea of an employer-sponsored savings account is novel to begin with. So, starting off with auto enrollment or auto savings is adding additional sort of novelty to this new concept. And retirement accounts didn't start out as auto enrollment, but kind of transitioned to that over time as we recognized the value of defaults, understood the behavioral components of reducing friction and setting up those opportunities to make it as easy as possible. But I think at the same time, even though we're just at the outset of recognizing the role of employers in short-term emergency savings, we know what works. And I think if the sooner we can get things like automatic enrollment or at least more frictionless options for employees, I think the faster we'll get to an effective system for short-term savings inspired by the kind of long-term savings experience.
Yeah, and another piece of this that I've heard employers reflect on is the regulatory compliance component. Right? It's always a little scary to be a first mover, but especially in a space where there's some uncertainty there. And that's really important because Commonwealth has been working with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to kind of clarify some of those regulatory uncertainties. So Brian, can you just briefly tell us what that program is that you've established with the CFPB and how employers can be involved?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to the sort of novelty of this benefit overall, as you said, there are some regulatory questions or regulatory clarity that I think employers and financial service providers would benefit from. One aspect of that, as we were exploring auto enrollment, that we identified was Regulation E, which implements the Electronic Funds Transfer Act, and which the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has jurisdiction over. The CFPB also has a compliance assistance sandbox program through their Office of Innovation that really allows organizations to apply for various regulatory safe harbors. So Commonwealth applied through that Compliance Assistance Sandbox program for a template that essentially provides a blueprint and guardrails for how an employer can offer a Reg E compliant autosave program. And the way I often think about it is like a cheat sheet for employers to reference when describing how they would specifically implement their own default opt-out emergency savings program for employees, while ensuring that, again, employees understand the autosave program, that they have ample opportunity to opt out if they already have a savings account or just don't want a portion of their pay to be directed into that savings account. Really, it's about ensuring that employees have choice in the process. So we have this template that was approved, employers would still need to apply for their specific program, but our template makes it easier, and it, again, provides those sort of guardrails or blueprints for an employer in partnership with a financial and service provider to know what kind of features or functionality that they want to consider when implementing their own autosave program.
So this is the plug to reach out to Brian if you want to learn more about that template and get engaged in that program. And Kabir, I want to bring you in to talk about the consumer perspective here of making decisions about enrolling an automatic savings program. I know Even offers an automatic savings option to employees through its platform. Can you tell us a bit about that feature and how workers access it and enroll?
Yeah, sure. So Even is a mobile application that's distributed as an employee benefit. So, you pull up your phone after you log in and authenticate with your employer and all that sort of stuff. There are a bunch of tabs in there that help you interface with your employer, your paycheck. So there's a tab that'll help you figure out how to budget and plan around your paycheck. There's a tab that tells you what paycheck is going to be, lets you take some of it early. And there's the progress tab, which is where you can decide on various savings goals that you might have and then act on them. So what you can do in this tab is you can, elect to set up a savings goal, which can be anything like, setting up a rainy day fund or saving up for something cool that you want to get, or a vacation that you deserve. You can set one of those things up, and we'll prompt you to then set aside a portion of your paycheck every pay period to go towards the savings fund. We start you off with a default of 3% of your paycheck, but you can slide it down to 1, and we currently let you go up to a max of 10%. So once you do that, and then you authorize us to do a bunch of work for you on the back end, we will spawn a savings account for you in the back end, and we'll just start doing it. We'll start taking a portion of your paycheck and putting it into this account for you. So a couple of important considerations, like we took great pains to make this as flexible a process as possible. So we have things like you can skip some of the automatic payments. You can withdraw at any time. Like there are no withdrawal limits. We're not trying to enforce that you keep savings in your savings account. It's there for you to use. You can also pause the autosave program at any time. And all those things together kind of give you agency and choice there to use it how you like. But
so you're kind of pairing this low friction to get started with control and ability to kind of configure it the way that would meet someone's financial health needs. Now, I know we work together through the Financial Health Leaders Lab, which is a program that we run to test out innovations to improve financial health. And we were focused in on how to essentially boost enrollment in this automatic savings feature, right? And so I'd love for you to talk us through kind of the process of how you updated that experience for Even users and what happened.
Yeah, for sure. So in what I just described, this is just one tab out of a multi-tab app. And we kind of expected in the past for employees to meander their way towards it at some point. We try to get your attention and badge it and make it pop up and stuff like that to engage attention a little bit. But what we decided to do with you was actually include it in the onboarding process. So while you were signing up with your employer, after you've done everything to actually set up the fundamentals of the app itself, we would present you with a choice. Now we would say, oh, hey, by the way, we can automatically save for you. Do you want to start saving? What is your goal? What is the default percentage you want? Or do you not want to start saving right now? It was this active choice that we presented employees with. It was just one additional screen that led to a flow that was already in the app. Just one extra thing. But that one extra thing paid huge dividends. It was kind of crazy to see. But after an 8-month period, we saw a 31% boost in enrollment over the control group that we tested with, a 41% boost in savings balances. A lot of that came just because if you start early, you'll just be saving more. It's a cumulative thing. The earliest you can start, the better. But yeah, it was pretty brilliant. Just presenting them with a choice led to engagement.
Something I was really heartened about in that study as well is that we were adding onto the app onboarding process when it's always a little sensitive. You don't want to load too much in. But if I recall correctly, Kabir, you didn't see any meaningful drop off. It wasn't an obstacle to add one more step there.
there's no drop off at all, because, you know, if it was a point of friction, you could always say no. And if it wasn't, then it was something that you wanted to do, and we got you hooked up with it.
Absolutely. So, you know, between the two of you, we've talked about a few different ways that employers can effectively offer these automatic savings options. You know, it's clear that we can do better than just have a savings account available and hope people come to it, right? We've got these tools of active choice or of automatic enrollment. And I'd like for each of you to share, you know, how employers should think about choosing between these various options, right? When is active choice going to be the best system for you to use? When might auto-enrollment be appropriate? So Brian, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on kind of how employers should choose between these?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think a tough one for any employer, and often in partnership with a financial service provider to decide. And, you know, we're using words like defaults and active choice, but it's really about the experience that the user is going through. And these, as Kabir just said, these subtle changes can be really powerful. At the same time, there's regulatory considerations as well. So, you know, from a regulatory standpoint, you know, our autosave template addressed one, Regulation E, but there are other regulatory considerations depending on where an employer is based, state wage and payroll laws, know your customer laws that have to be considered when designing a program. And in some cases, that active choice might be more compliant with the state wage and payroll laws than a model in which you are defaulted in and you have to take some proactive step to opt out or choose not to. So, you know, that's one consideration, but also it's really critical to consider your employees' life situations and their experiences. I think we've emphasized on this conversation, you know, informed choice is really critical. You can still have informed choice in an opt-out model where an employee has to actively check a box to say, no, I don't want to participate in this, but that is a bit of a higher burden on an employee and employees who are living paycheck to paycheck and just may not be comfortable with that automated enrollment. That's a consideration that you need to take as an employer. In those situations, maybe an active choice where an employee has the option to say, yes, I want to participate, or no, I don't. I mean, that's going to be more effective than the very baseline, we have an account here. If you happen to find it and want to use it, you can. You know, I think if you are so new to this that has to be your starting point, that's okay. And we just want more employers offering emergency savings. But I think for me, thinking about active choice as even the first step is really powerful because it grabs attention of, and that's such a critical component of navigating employee benefits is to grab someone's attention. You're not forcing them to do anything, requiring them to do anything other than pay attention for a moment and decide one way or another. So given regulatory concerns and your employer's situation, first step. But even with that choice, we know that participation rates will probably be less than if you could do that true default opt-out model where an employee is checking a box to not participate.
Yeah, Kabir, anything how employers should think about choosing between auto-enrollment or active choice?
Yeah, mainly I want to double down on the importance of that informed consent. Like at the end of it all, you just want to make sure that your employees are not being blindsided. So if you have the communication to promulgate the idea of an autosave and you get buy-in and people are into it, then I think that would definitely be the way to go. Like an auto-enroll would definitely be the gold standard. In cases where you can't, active choice makes sense. And also it depends on content. An automatic enrollment definitely makes sense. But for example, if people turn the program off and you want them to get back on, you can't auto-enroll them back on, but you might be able to present them with a choice. And that might be a way to re-engage them.
I'm so glad we had the opportunity to kind of reveal a couple of different ways employers can start thinking about automatic savings and options for how to present that to their employees. As we close out here, I'd like for each of you to share maybe just one, first that you would recommend employers take as they're starting to think about offering automatic savings and what they can do there. So Kabir, let's start with you. What's your kind of primary recommendation of a first step an employer should be thinking about taking?
First step might be talk about money at all with your employees. Like a lot of them might be reticent to talk about short-term savings and the need for it with their employer. I think with 401k, it's a little bit less of a problem because it's such a normalized standard thing. But when you have this new program, just be reluctant to talk to their employers about it. You need to really make sure that they're comfortable talking to it, and that will later let you get the consent and buy-in to offer these interesting and hopefully very helpful programs.
So start the conversation. Brian, quickly, what's your first step that you would recommend?
Similar, but I would say start the conversation with your bank partners, with your payroll providers, with the vendors you're already working with your retirement plan providers. There's new emergency savings solutions that are being designed for employers every day. And so as you start that conversation, there's going to be more high quality options for you as an employer to choose from in order to put in front of your employees.
Wonderful. Well, Brian, Kabir, thank you both so much for participating in this panel. We're going to be moving ahead to our next session on understanding the impact of workplace FinHealth programs and solutions. Leaders from Washington University in St. Louis are going to be summarizing some of the key takeaways they have from working with financial health focused fintechs. So they're going to share some early findings about what works best and for whom. We're going to start that session momentarily. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're just joining the session, welcome. This is the piece on understanding the impact of workplace financial health programs and solutions, and we're so excited to get into it. My name is Miriam Freeman. I'm the Program Manager for Financial Health at the JPMorgan Chase Foundation. I've worked really closely with the Financial Solutions Lab team behind this report, along with WashU, and we're going to have a really great conversation as well as see directly from the companies that were involved about some of the findings over this research that has taken place over the past couple of years. So just to give you all a little bit of background, the Financial Solutions Lab, in partnership with the Social Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis, conducted research with 5 Financial Solutions Lab alumni companies, and those are Brightside, Honeybee, Manifest, MedPut, and Onward. They were all participants in the lab cohort focused on workplace financial health in 2019. And this research is focused on what works in fintech innovation for worker financial health. The Financial Solutions Lab is a $60 million 10-year initiative managed by the Financial Health Network in collaboration with founding partner JPMorgan Chase and with support from Prudential Financial. And this session is about showcasing results, and we're so excited to share the findings from these exploratory studies, which suggest that employer channel fintechs are in demand among employees, can be an effective tool for improving employee financial health, and can improve employee retention. So with that, I'll give Matt Despard, who's joining us from WashU, a chance to introduce himself and his role, and then we'll dive right in. Matt.
Thanks, Miriam. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Despard. I'm a faculty director and visiting scholar at the Social Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis. And we were very pleased to partner with the Financial Health Network to complete these exploratory studies of these products and services. And we learned a lot, and enjoyed working with the partners, and I look forward to sharing some of those high-level results with you today.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. So first, let's hear directly from the companies in a quick video, and then we'll get into a Q&A.
And Manifest, we're the easiest way for participants to consolidate their retirement accounts. Our work with Washington University and the Financial Health Network has been really important. Generally difficult to target demographics within a plan. Females, people that are younger, minorities. Manifest was able to increase their transfer rate and therefore maximize their retirement outcomes. By measuring our impact on a plan, we're able to build a case study that we can share with other large employers and grow our user base.
Honeybee has a high-quality, holistic approach to financial health by providing our no-cost rainy day fund. The specific findings that we found from WashU, a quarter of our users say they would have used a payday loan if they didn't have Honeybee, which is a clear indicator that Honeybee provides a safer, more responsible, and sustainable solution to other alternative financial services or higher interest loan options. There's a lot of potential for fintech to make an enormous difference in reducing economic barriers to allow people of color to gain full access to financial health products.
MedPut is an employee benefit that makes every company's health plan even more powerful by paying for any out-of-pocket health expense for your employees upfront and essentially converting any out-of-pocket cost into interest-free installments that an employee can pay seamlessly from their paycheck over time. The employer channel is a very powerful way to improve the financial health of the workforce. Nearly a third of employees that use MedPut actually used it to pay for a bill that was already overdue. And the majority of surveyed users said they were at high risk of putting off medical treatments if MedPut wasn't an option for them.
Brightside is a complete solution for employee financial care. Our financial assistants provide personalized help for employees with acute money issues, as well as assisting with medium and long-term planning. The most important outcome we saw in the research that we conducted with WashU was a dramatic reduction in employee turnover, which increased with additional engagement on behalf of the user. We learned that LMI individuals appear to be eager to engage with financial solutions. This is a population that's historically been underserved with financial advice and access to resources to help them with their finances.
Onward is a nonprofit fintech that seeks to help every worker build a financial cushion. While Onward was intentionally designed for low to moderate income workers, we noticed that workers across the income spectrum still struggle with financial security. There were a number of withdrawals from users' accounts, but for the purposes of medical emergencies and more often than we expected, overdrafts. So there's a product implication of can we do more to make funds more readily available when people need them, or even proactively help folks avoid overdraft going forward.
So those are some great highlights, and I would encourage everyone to also check out the full report. There's a nice summary as well as individual reports on each of the companies and the specific findings. But let's discuss some of those high-level findings. So one of the main things that I think is very interesting is that it shows in the study that products and services being provided by these fintechs are mostly being used by financially vulnerable workers. So question for you, Matt, does that mean that using these products and services is causing people to be financially vulnerable?
No, it doesn't. That's a great question. What it does tell us is that these products and services are reaching the right people, reaching a group of, as you mentioned, financially vulnerable frontline workers in many of these companies. And that's significant because a lot of these workers don't necessarily have good access to affordable financial products and services. And financial inclusion, providing greater access really is well suited for the workplace because employers and fintech companies can work together to do things like leverage payroll systems to enable loan repayments and savings deposits.
Yeah, that's great. So that means that these companies are really doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing in their mission alignment and reaching the folks who they would intend to be reaching, which benefits the employers also, right? So I think that that gets to one of the other big findings here, which is that this is really great news all across the board. And now we have some of the data to back it up, right? Can you share more about some of those impressive outcomes and some of your favorite tidbits from the study?
Sure. The findings really break out into three themes or buckets, if you will. The first one is that these products and services seem to help workers just better manage their cash flow needs so that they can meet their basic living expenses. And to give you an idea or an example, there were employees that were able to use loans to get caught up on medical bills or to repair things in their home that had been put off, or repair an appliance. And so those are things that they ordinarily couldn't do just with their wages alone. And again, a lot of these workers don't have good access to affordable credit options. And in helping them manage their cash flow and meet some of those essential needs, it seems to have helped them with immediate financial relief from the financial stress that they were experiencing. So a second key theme is that there's some evidence to suggest that many of these workers, in using these products and services, were able to avoid using some high-cost products in the marketplace, such as payday loans. A lot of the workers we studied had used payday loans in the past and were now using much more affordable products, and so that's really significant. And then the third theme or bucket is that in one study we actually saw a link between use of the financial management platform and lower turnover, meaning that when we compared employees who used the platform with employees who didn't, turnover was lower in that group of employees who actually used the platform.
Those are really compelling findings. Thanks, Matt. And do you have any information on how some of those things have changed over the course of the COVID pandemic that we've all been living through? I think it was not intentional that you all were doing this research during that time period, but of course you were able to see some of the data before and after as well.
Yeah, certainly. We, midstream with these projects, we were in close communication with the partner companies about, gosh, what's going on? How are our workers affected? You know, fortunately, a lot of the workers remained employed throughout COVID, and but that doesn't mean that they weren't experiencing other difficulties. And I was really impressed by a couple of the companies who were more flexible with respect to loan repayment, and were just able to adapt their products and services kind of on the fly to help workers deal with whatever they were confronting during COVID. And in another study, we actually had somewhat of a surprising finding where we saw some savings actually increase a little bit during COVID. This was among a group of workers who remained employed, fortunately, and we suspect that it may have been because some of their living expenses had gone down a little bit. Perhaps they were receiving an economic relief payment through the federal government, and that gave them just a little more cushion to put some more money into savings, which was a really nice finding.
Yes, that's a wonderful, compelling example of how these types of services can be useful in good times and bad and really adapt as necessary to the circumstances as well. So with that, my last question for you is for all of the HR professionals who are on the phone who may be thinking, this sounds like something I could use and have provided to employees at my company. Can you give us some tips on what this research suggests about what they should be looking for in terms of making those connections and choosing providers of services that are a good fit?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with, there are 3 things I think companies should look for in the financial wellness solutions themselves, the platforms and the apps that are available. One is, I think it's really critical that the app or platform be integrated and connected with the company's payroll system, that it has that functionality, just because payroll deducted loan payments and savings deposits are really critical, because the more automation that can be built into our financial behaviors, the better. It just reduces risks of workers defaulting on loans, and it can make savings automatic. Once it starts coming out of your paycheck, you forget about it, but you're building saving. So I think integrating and leveraging the power of payroll is huge. So that's the first one. The second one, I think the apps and platforms are useful not just when they enable access to a financial product like a loan or a savings account, but also giving workers some financial management tools. So ways where they can better understand their cash flow and say, oh, wow, I get paid on this day of the month, and these bills are due, at these times of the month. And just to be able to better visualize what's happening in their financial lives to help them make good decisions. And then I think the third thing that you would want to look for in a product or service would be access to real human beings. Yeah, not just, there's a lot of great things with digital financial services, but sometimes we run into difficulties in our financial lives where we need to talk to a real person. So access to financial coaches to help us and help workers deal with those trickier financial issues is really important. So then in terms of the companies, what to look for, I really think it's simple. There's just 2 things that I recommend we look for in one of these companies. One is that the company is truly dedicated in its mission to financial health, especially among frontline workers who have a lot going on in their lives. And then number 2 would be a company that is dedicated to evaluation, self-critique, and learning, meaning that they're always trying to figure out what's working, what's not, how can we make our product even better to meet the financial needs, again, especially of frontline workers, and versus companies that just push out a lot of untested marketing claims. So those would be the 2 things I would be looking for.
Thanks, Matt. That's super helpful. And it definitely ties into some of the other themes that we've heard throughout the day about the importance of behavioral economics and nudges and how all of that ties in to how people can manage their financial lives and how employers can best support them in making that journey as easy as possible and as seamless as possible, really. So with that, I think we are at our time to move to the next session and hear more about those broader frameworks exactly for what you're getting to, which is how best employers can evaluate what they should do next to provide employee financial health. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time in this session, as well as for all of your work on this research. It really is a rare opportunity to get this level of detailed insight into the impactful work that these companies have been providing, and want to acknowledge them as well, to, as your point, being open and transparent to learning throughout this journey and showing their impact so we can all collectively make use of it to advance employee financial health. Thank you.
Matt and Miriam, for leading us through that conversation. So much of the work we do here at the Financial Health Network is rooted in our belief that what gets measured gets managed. So we have a poll question for you all, asking you to help us understand, how are you thinking about assessing the financial health of your workforce? Of course, assessment is normally just the first step in an organization's journey in providing and delivering opportunities and solutions to help improve the financial health of their workforce. Here at the Financial Health Network, we are committed to continuing to bring to market innovative solutions and frameworks that can help employers advance in their journey of workplace financial health. And as we see from the poll here, many folks are also asking that question, where do I start? How do I start to think about understanding the needs of my workforce? Well, we've got news for you. We're going to give you a sneak peek of some new tools and solutions that we'll be bringing to the market to help employers advance in their financial health journey.
As a human resources leader, you know that the financial health of your employees matters, both to them and to your business. Now more than ever, employees at all income levels, but especially those with low to moderate incomes, struggle with their finances. And when people are worried about their finances, they struggle to stay focused and productive at work. What's more, employees have come to expect that their employer will provide wages and benefits that support their financial health. What can you do to support the financial health of your employees and strengthen your business? Based on our work with employers across industries, we at the Financial Health Network recommend a proven 4-step approach. First, start by diagnosing the unique financial health needs of your workforce. Take time to understand the diverse needs of specific employee segments, such as workers of color, frontline workers, and women, and prioritize the needs that are most acute. Second, identify solutions. Review your existing programs and benefits to identify where you might have gaps. This includes assessing your core compensation, benefits, scheduling, and leave policies. How are they supporting or undermining your employees' financial health? From there, identify and prioritize potential solutions to fill the gaps. Third, use strategies based on behavioral science to maximize engagement with the benefits you offer. As humans, we are subject to a variety of psychological and emotional biases that influence how we use workplace benefits. Smart benefits design that takes these factors into account can help ensure that your programs reach those who need them the most. Lastly, measure the impact of your programs and solutions to know whether they are working. It's important to develop a plan for assessing impact before rolling out new solutions. Looking for more actionable steps you can take? Later this year, Financial Health Network will publish an Employer Financial Health Toolkit containing practical tools, advice, and case studies to help you diagnose and improve the financial health of your workforce. Sign up for updates and stay tuned for more insights. Together, we can build a financially healthy workforce that enables individuals, communities, and businesses to thrive. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for day one of Emerge Workplace. I am now joined by our speakers from several of our sessions today, Matthew Despard from UNC Greenboro, Ryan Eigelhart from Humana, and Naeem Kabir from Even Responsible Finance. Before we dive into our closing roundtable, we want to get a pulse from you, our audience, about what you are finding valuable about Emerge Workplace today. In just a moment, you'll see a poll pop up on the screen, and we will just take a minute to ask folks to chime in and respond to the poll about what you're finding valuable about today's sessions. So what is the most valuable aspect of Emerge Workplace thus far? Is it gaining a better understanding of the impact of workplace financial health, learning new tools to address the financial health of your company's employees, hearing real-world case studies, and engaging with a community of peers? I know for me, it's been all of the above. So we'll just wait a minute or two for those results to pop up on the screen. In the meantime, we'll be diving in shortly to our roundtable. Really want to thank Ryan, Kabir, and Matt for sticking around. We're going to just draw on a couple of themes that have come out thanks to all of the really good listener questions and comments. So while we wait for the poll results, why don't we dive in right away to the first theme. I think a really interesting theme I actually heard throughout basically all of the sessions today, it relates to company culture and aligning workplace financial health to an organization's culture. In our first session, Grace spoke about how for Chobani, investing in the financial health of their workers is not just about helping workers with their needs, but also aligning, it really aligns to Chobani's brand strategy and how they communicate with their consumers about the type of company they are and about their culture internally as an organization. And you, Ryan, in our session spoke about culture as well and how financial health and investing in your associates' financial health ties to your talent strategy. So I'm curious for each of you to comment about how either in your own organization, in your case, Ryan, or in other organizations with whom you work, how are organizations communicating about their financial health efforts, either with consumers or clients, or with your current or prospective employees? Maybe Ryan, we'll start with you, and then we'll open it up to Matt and Kabir.
Sure, I'd be happy to lead off, and I would start by saying that these are difficult conversations, and I think that in corporate America as a whole, I'm going to generalize here, but I think that we're a little bit behind in terms of a comfort level talking about personal finances, financial well-being, etc., compared to where we were health-wise and that kind of thing. I think that as it becomes a business case for addressing some of these things, it really becomes more important for an organization to really embrace, and you find more and more people across the country in corporate settings being willing to embrace this. That was true with health assessments and biometrics, 10, 15 years ago, and increasingly I feel like, now is part of the moment for financial health. For a long time, it was a conversation around, well, are you putting enough in your 401k? And there was a sort of assumption that, saving at a certain rate, amassing a certain amount in a defined contribution plan was the equivalent of assessing somebody's financial health. I think now that there's a realization that it's much more complex than that. Short-term needs, long-term needs, complex needs brought about by emergency savings versus credit and debt issues. And I think in all of that, there's really a need for empathy and for being okay talking about some of the messy aspects of this, because it's not necessarily clean, and there is no right or wrong answer. There's a lot of variability, and so I would just sort of say that in general that that is part of what we experience as a company, and more leaders are showing that they're willing to go there and they're getting better at having those conversations. The last thing I would say is, in our company, the number one indicator of whether an employee is engaged is whether their direct leader cares about their well-being, as evidenced by that individual's perception of whether their leader cares. And so financial well-being is just one component of that, but that really does have an impact on whether or not those employees come to work, are engaged, are producing, are really driving the company forward.
Yeah, what about you, Kabir? What have you seen in the companies that Even works with? How are companies communicating about financial well-being, either with their end users and customers or with their employees themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on exactly how they communicate with their employees. I can definitely comment on what the literature says is the right way and the wrong way of going about things, though. Like, for example, paternalism is probably going to be the wrong way of going about things and will generally make people shut down. Like if you are very prescriptive in how you should be managing your financial life instead of being open, understanding, and meeting people where they are, they will probably not want to talk to you about that. And touching on what Ryan just said, yeah, like PwC released that one employee wellness survey a couple of years back where it showed that people actually care whether or not their employers care about their financial status where they are. So I think a lot of the communication has to be listening. It's got to be like, where are you? How do you think about how to manage your own financial health? And not so much telling people what to do, because that's just going to shut people down, I imagine.
Matt, love to hear your thoughts on this theme.
I love how this conversation is framed around company culture, because in terms of the way the company communicates to its employees about these issues, well, the way it's received, which is really more important, I think, will depend on how employees already feel about the company. And if there's a culture in which employees feel that the company does value them and value their contributions and provides the best quality of job and pay and benefits that the company can reasonably offer, then the message will be received. And the opposite is true. If employees feel like, well, wait, where is this coming from? Why all of a sudden does this company that I don't feel very valued by seems to be interested in my financial well-being? I'm kind of skeptical.
Yeah, I think the importance of authenticity and being transparent and clear about the reasons why the company is investing in financial health is a really critical component. I want to turn to another theme that I heard in several sessions, which is around making financial health not just an HR priority, but really making it a business and enterprise-wide priority. I think, we talked about this a little bit too in our session, Ryan, when we talked about the importance of the impact of making the data so broadly available across the company to leaders across the company, and how that influenced decision-making and buy-in at senior levels of leadership. And I know, Matt, that's a big focus of the work that you all do on impact evaluation, is really helping organizations demonstrate the impact of companies, of the solutions that they're offering to their workforce. So I'm curious, maybe Matt, starting with you, how have you seen this differ based on the size of the company in terms of using data and unleashing data to really demonstrate both the need and the impact of the solutions being offered and securing that buy-in from leadership?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, to the extent possible, companies leveraging their human resource information systems to figure out how the introduction of these types of benefits, or really any other types of benefits, may be associated with certain metrics such as turnover or absenteeism. And at least to see, does there seem to be something happening here? And but at the same time, to use those systems to look at how the company's operations may be impacting employees in other ways. Are employees struggling with absenteeism because work scheduling is very difficult for them, because they're juggling multiple demands in their lives, caregiving demands of older relatives or children. And we definitely see that, as you might imagine, among women employees. And also we're really cognizant of the fact that people of color have a set of burdens that are greater than others. And so just looking at holistically what the company is doing, how it may be impacting employees in multiple ways, such as scheduling, and as much as possible, digging into their own data to help answer some of those questions.
Yeah, Ryan or Kabir, I'm curious for your thoughts. What would be, if someone in the audience is listening and thinking, yes, I understand financial health is important to my workforce. I have a sense of some of the ways I might start gathering some of the data I need to demonstrate that, but how do I make the case to leadership? How do I secure buy-in? Where would you suggest they start, or what would you suggest they do? Ryan, let's start with you.
I was going to wait for Kabir to chime in with a clever answer. But I mean, I think from my perspective, I would say that there really is, from where I sit within a company, trying to offer our associates the right mix of benefits and support and education. I would say there's actually, not as much literature out there as we could use to actually justify, exactly what we'd like to offer. What Matt was speaking to, I think that there's some consultants and some studies out there, that can be referenced and sort of extrapolated from, but there's not a lot of great systems, I think, for actually analyzing the real impact when you implement a solution in a real live company. And there's just a lot of other variables that are in the mix that are happening at the same time that, Kabir and I actually have talked about, experimenting in a corporate culture. And one of the reservations is that we don't want to literally be experimenting on, one population of associates versus another, giving them a different experience that would potentially be suboptimal for one versus the other. And so I think that there's, I would say I don't have a lot of great answers other than to say that that's something that we continue to look for, find ways to collaborate on and really share best practices all around this sphere, from academia to, consultants, vendors, companies, employers, et cetera, because I think that when that information is shared, it only puts us all in a better position to actually support the wide range of associate needs.
I do want to touch on this. So I think the heart of your question, Beth, was, how do you get buy-in for doing impact measurement at all in the first place? One really easy way to do that is to get a pilot set of measurements. Like, for example, if you were to go out, just do a random sampling and survey people using something like Financial Health Network's Financial Wellness Toolkit or any other survey instrument you find that's been vetted and is reliable, and you can tell that there is some segment of the population of the company that's hurting or not doing well, or they're vulnerable, that's something that leadership is going to want to know. You're going to take this information that people were blind to at some point and throw some light on it. And once people know that a problem exists at all, they're going to want to keep tabs on it. And from there, you can start doing live measurement and do it more regularly, expand it, and then that naturally leads to, okay, doing impact studies. You have these measurements, now what are you going to do about it? So that's when you bring in vendors, benefits, interventions, and you can do tests. You're just okay, what's driving this down? What's driving this up? But it's very difficult to argue with a method and some numbers if you're just hey, 34% of our population is hurting. People can't ignore it. So just doing a random survey might be all you need. Collecting something might be all you need.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Kabir. I love the suggestion just to start with what you have. Not strive for perfect, but just start where you can, start where you are. And maybe I think we have just a few minutes left in our closing minutes. Maybe Ryan, I'll ask you for the last word. You have dozens and dozens and dozens of metrics that you've been able to develop and gather and compile over time in the 11 years you've been working on the snapshot. For someone who might be just getting started, either understanding their employees' needs or trying to understand the impact of benefits they have in place, where would you suggest they begin beyond just a survey? What might be one or two metrics that you suggest, a handful of metrics that they should look for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kabir was right on point. With from a financial perspective, I will say that the Financial Health Network FinHealth Score is a super simple survey that actually gets at some of the the base behaviors and can help target any interventions you're looking to support. So in financial health, we actually started using that measure this January and are getting a baseline and are going to be tracking that going forward. So I think that's a really good place to start. I do think that naturally most employers of any size have some partners already at the table, typically a 401k provider and that kind of thing. And while that is not necessarily the be-all end-all of financial well-being, if you're looking to start at square one, they probably already have some capabilities as a third-party administrator of a financial plan, planner for you, that they can actually come to the table and really help you think about, who appears based on the limited available metrics to be on track, who might be, who might be falling behind or have an opportunity to be nudged and educated. And oftentimes those providers in the past were providing a service. Now they really are, providing education, and they're providing other tools as well. So I think that using those partners in place probably is a really good place to start, and they probably have more tools than we all realize to actually make a difference once you've started to measure with them.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that practical advice. As I look at the results of the poll we just did, the two top things that people are excited about or have found valuable in today's sessions are learning new tools to address the financial health of my company's employees and hearing real world case studies. And I think this discussion we just had is really typifies that. So want to thank you all for your time today. This brings us to the conclusions of today's sessions for FinHealth for Workforces Learn What Works. Before we wrap, I encourage you to join us tomorrow at 10:30 Central, where we'll be hearing from leading experts in employment and human resources on the critical relationship between business innovation and financial health across industries and demographics. We hope to see you then.